Welcome to the Deep Dive. You've sent us a stack of sources that, well, they fundamentally challenge how we view something we do every single day.
Yeah,
Shopping.
they really do.
Our mission today is to take a deep dive into what's called material politics. This powerful idea that consumption is never, ever just an economic transaction.
Oh, yeah.
It is, and it seems it always has been, a massive political and moral battlefield.
That's exactly right. We are tracking what the sources call consumer citizenship across 2 centuries and 4 major nations: France, Germany, Britain, and the United States.
And all of them are wrestling with the same basic conflicts.
Yes, all these histories, they're all circling around the same foundational questions, which makes the whole idea of who you are when you buy something really, really volatile.
And getting a handle on these conflicts is almost like a shortcut to understanding the political history of the last 200 years.
Yeah.
So let's start with the moral core of it. Did this relentless drive for consumption, did it subvert the social and moral order, creating division and decadence? Or was it the opposite? Was it the main way different classes were integrated into one unified nation?
That's tension number one. And tension number two is all about agency. I mean, we're tracking this constant political struggle between the consumer as a subject,
Someone who actually voices their own interest, who organizes.
exactly, makes demands, versus the consumer as an object, someone who is, constructed and spoken for by other groups, whether that's state reformers, advertisers, or political parties.
Right. And finally, the conflict that might be the most fundamental and surprisingly potent, it goes back forever.
It really does.
Just defining the boundary between a necessity and a luxury,
Uh,
that one seemingly simple distinction,
yeah.
it can carry the highest political stakes. We're talking life and death.
And just to set the stage for you, this whole study of consumer history, this idea that shopping has a political life, it really flourished in recent decades.
Why then?
Well, scholars were partly responding to the intense political focus on consumerism by, say, conservative and Republican governments in the 80s. They championed the consumer as the ultimate economic voter.
Yeah.
But they were also reacting against these earlier, much darker critiques of mass consumption from the mid-20th century. So what we have here is this vast historical sweep, but it's all unified by these core themes.
Okay, let's unpack this with a story that shows just how literal those life or death stakes were. We're heading straight back to the height of the French Revolution, 1793, 1794, the Reign of Terror.
It's a truly bizarre piece of history. I mean, you have the Republic facing these urgent issues: revolution, civil war, foreign armies marching on Paris.
Total crisis.
Total crisis. And yet the French National Convention dedicated significant political time to debating the precise legal meanings of specific items.
That's incredible. Wait, they were debating 8 barrels of rum when the guillotine was running? That
Whoa.
sounds like total political madness.
Well, it wasn't madness, it was the law. They had passed this thing called the General Maximum, a decree that regulated prices and wages. And crucially, the law rested on this terrifying principle that to hoard a necessity,
Meaning to hold it off the market for your own profit.
yes, that was considered an act against the Republic, and it was a capital offense.
And this brings us to the famous case of the rum. So a politician, Pierre-François Joseph Robert, was charged by local militants with hoarding a good of prime necessity.
And the evidence was literally 8 barrels of rum they found in his cellar.
So the whole debate wasn't about whether he was a good revolutionary.
No, not at all. It was purely about the definition of rum. If rum was legally defined as a luxury, well, stockpiling was just morally questionable, but it was allowed. But if it was defined as a necessity, he faced execution.
So we see the stakes of that necessity versus luxury question laid bare. But how did the convention actually make that call?
This is where it gets so fascinating. The law wasn't interested in the rum's exchange value, how much it cost. It rested on the assumption that luxuriousness was an inherent property of the good itself, its use value. Does society fundamentally need rum to survive, or is it just, a pleasurable extra?
So they cared about what the rum was, its function, not what market price it could fetch.
Precisely. Although the legal debate kind of stalled. In the end, Robert's local political section, they just bypassed all the legal jargon and concluded something much simpler:
Which was?
that no individual should have so much of any liquor when the Republic was starving. That material reality, that gross imbalance, it just trumped the legal definition.
That connects directly to the whole philosophy of the French Revolution, the right to subsistence. But this fight over necessary versus unnatural goods, it was also driving early socialist movements in Britain, too.
Absolutely. You can think of this as like the origin of the modern sustainability debate. Early communitarian socialists, they explicitly distinguish between natural wants and unnatural wants.
Okay, so what made an unnatural want so dangerous to them?
They saw them as economically destructive, but also morally degrading. Unnatural wants impose unnecessary toil on working people. It forced them into long, hard labor just to produce, well, frivolous items.
Economically.
Economically, they created volatility. These crises that resulted from the rich eventually satisfying all their frivolous desires, which led to these periodic drops in demand.
So if they got rid of that excess demand, if they pursued what they called the simplification of desire, what was the ultimate goal? Just a stable economy.
No, the goal was much bigger. For figures like William Morris, it was radical human liberation. If you limit consumption to satisfying real needs, that would lead to material abundance defined by those needs.
Right.
And critically, this would then free up the majority of people's time that was currently spent on degrading toil, so it could be spent on higher pursuits,
Yes.
philosophy, literature, music. For them, consumption was only okay if it didn't impose intellectual atrophy on the producers.
That's a powerful idea. If we fast forward a century, we see this conversation shift from, philosophical toil to defining your place in the nation. Let's shift focus now to how consumption defines who you are as a full citizen, especially in the US and UK during the 20th century.
In the U.S., the historian Elizabeth Cohen defined this whole political landscape, from the Gilded Age through post-World War II, with a really clear tool: the split between the citizen consumer and the customer consumer.
Okay, so the citizen consumer.
Yeah.
That's the idealized, civic-minded buyer, the one who considers the general good of the nation.
Exactly. They were organized by groups like the National Consumers League. They saw things like antitrust laws and fair labor practices as Republican civic ideals. It was a collective political duty.
But the customer consumer flips that entirely.
Completely. This is the individual who just wants to maximize their own personal economic interests. They're supported by corporate interests, by politicians who argue that the unregulated free market is the best, most efficient way to get good stuff to individuals.
And the real ideological victory came after World War II.
Yes, with the rise of the Consumers' Republic. Here, the political goal was to convince the American population that the customer was the citizen. You were taught that you could simultaneously fulfill personal desire and civic obligation by consuming.
So buying a new car or a toaster wasn't just you getting something you want.
No, it was keeping the engines of American freedom and democracy running. It was your patriotic duty.
But did that promise of mass prosperity actually reach everyone equally? Because our sources highlight that this ideal was fundamentally reinforced by policies that favored a specific group.
It absolutely wasn't equal, which links right back to our attention about who gets to define the consumer.
Yeah.
Post-war policies, while they looked like they were for everyone, really reinforced the traditional male breadwinner model.
How so?
Well, take the GI Bill. It was transformative, providing loans and education benefits. But those benefits were primarily available to male veterans, so most women were excluded. And on top of that, Black veterans often faced massive racial discrimination when they tried to access the housing and education the bill provided.
So the economic benefit of being a successful consumer was structurally tied to the specific race and gender demographics.
Precisely. And another less-known example is the 1948 adoption of the income-splitting joint tax return. This measure dramatically favored traditional married couples where the wife did not work outside the home.
So it actively discouraged women from having careers.
It provided very little incentive for women to pursue independent, higher-earning careers. The tax structure itself financially affirmed this idea of the wife as the primary household consumer, supported by the male breadwinner.
Speaking of structural changes, let's look across the pond. The UK offers a strong contrast, moving from a foundation based on economic freedom to one based on social welfare.
That's the shift from the classic pre-WWI liberal ideal of the cheap loaf and free trade to the post-WWI era defined by clean milk and social democratic ideals.
The cheap loaf. That meant low-cost, unregulated grain imports. That was the foundation of working-class well-being. But that changed when consumption became a matter of public health, which required state control.
The milk question became an issue of social citizenship. After World War I, popular demands for state controls just escalated, and milk became this fundamental issue linked to public health, especially for women and children. It shows social rights were replacing purely economic rights as the core idea of consumer citizenship.
And the people mobilized, they forced the state's hand.
Mhm.
You have this amazing image of Bristol women marching in a mass rally in Hyde Park in 1919. Hundreds of thousands of people demanding lower prices.
And they had a clear corporate villain to target.
Yeah.
The London Milk Combine, United Dairies Ltd. By the end of World War I, it controlled 80% of the milk supply for Greater London.
Wow.
That level of monopoly just proved that the interests of the consumer, and by extension the health of the nation, required state protection against the free market, not buy it.
That brings us neatly to a place where the state controlled everything but still had to negotiate with the consumer. Here's where it gets really important. The politics of consumption in two German dictatorships, Nazi Germany and the GDR.
In Nazi Germany, from 1933 to 1939, the regime was trapped by this fundamental butter and guns paradox. Hitler wanted both. He wanted high standards of living for loyal Germans and rapid total rearmament.
But you can't have both.
Right. Economic mobilization was severely constrained by the regime's need to secure the political loyalty of the masses. They knew they couldn't risk the stability of the Reich by asking for too many sacrifices too fast.
So they use a combination of direct subsidies and psychological enticement to keep the working classes happy, or at least hopeful.
Exactly. The subsidies were direct, like the famous marriage loans, which were partially forgiven when you had children, a direct pronatalist drive-through material reward. But the more powerful tool was creating a virtual reality of imagined consumption.
What does virtual consumption mean in this context?
It was about promising the future rather than delivering the present. Propaganda promised that German workers would be better off than an English lord in 10 years. They used subsidized cheap mass tourism, the famous Kraft durch Freude, strength through joy, cruises, to make luxury travel seem psychologically reachable.
So even if you couldn't go, you knew it was possible.
Exactly.
Right.
Even if only a tiny fraction of workers could ever afford a cruise, the fact that the regime offered it just widened consumer horizons and kept that hope alive.
And they linked technology directly to political survival, right?
Yes. Food technology canning, refrigeration, deep freezing was promoted specifically to achieve autarky.
Economic self-sufficiency.
Right, designed to make Germany immune to a wartime blockade. And ironically, those very processes and technologies, which were created for political mobilization, they later became the fundamental basis of West German consumer society after 1945.
The control side, however, sounds much less pleasant than the cruise ship propaganda.
It was harsh. They maintained strict wage control, and price increases were often hidden through, quality deterioration or shortages. And they had the wildly unpopular Fight the Waste campaign, Kampf dem Verderb, which required mandatory collections of scrap and kitchen refuse.
That must have been infuriating.
People felt they were already deprived and then were told to scrounge for the state.
Now contrast that with the GDR in the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah.
Their need to satisfy the consumer was even more desperate.
Much more. Because West Germany was sitting right next door, setting this unattainably high standard.
The comparison was an existential threat.
It was. When the ruling party tried to improve efficiency by raising work norms, meaning workers had to produce more for the same pay, it triggered the June 17, 1953 revolt.
Wow.
This was a clear message that consumption, or the lack of it, was core to the dictatorship's survival. The SED was forced to immediately reverse the norms, increase wages, and reduce prices, even as they were arresting thousands of people involved.
So how did they handle the constant supply shortages and the fact that East German currency was effectively worthless compared to the West German mark?
They created an officially sanctioned black market, a truly unique political compromise. They established these Händel organization, or free shops, as early as 1948 to sell goods without ration cards just to soak up excess cash.
They were recognizing that people wanted things the state couldn't consistently provide.
Exactly. And this led to dedicated luxury shops, exquisite and delicate, selling high-quality, expensive, often imported goods. But the real structural genius, or maybe cynicism, came with the intershops after 1962.
And what were those?
These were stores that only accepted Western currency, specifically the West German mark, which many citizens got from relatives in the West.
That's fascinating. They allowed their own citizens to use a foreign hostile currency to buy luxury goods, explicitly recognizing the superiority of the opposing economic model just to stay stable.
It was the ultimate compromise. The regime was basically saying, we know you want these goods and we know you have this powerful Western currency. We will allow you to access luxury, but only if you channel that hard currency directly into our state coffers. It was necessary for survival.
Let's turn finally to the modern era and how different countries formalized the organization of consumer interests. Post-WWII, Britain took a very rational approach with the 1959 Maloney Committee.
This committee effectively institutionalized a specific, limited vision of the consumer, the confident consumer. They viewed consumer protection strictly as a rational economic act based on value for money, choice, and competition.
So this was a deliberate depoliticization of the consumer role, wasn't it? It strips away that idea of the consumer as a social citizen, moving back toward the economic customer.
Absolutely. It was rooted in liberal voluntarist traditions. This model focused on organizations like the Consumers Association, which provided testing and published reports on product quality. The goal was to make the consumer a smarter economic calculator, not a political activist.
Now contrast that with France in the 1970s and 80s, where consumerism was anything but depoliticized.
Oh, France maintained a radical activist tradition. Consumer groups often emerged directly from trade unions, which gave them this huge popular mobilization, around 50,000 militants in local unions, according to our sources.
So if you had a consumer grievance in France, you had a grassroots movement to back you up.
Yes. Their legitimacy came from broad membership and their willingness to engage in direct, often confrontational negotiation with industry. They might challenge deceptive advertising or even engage in boycotts. They were politically noisy.
And Germany took the opposite tack entirely.
The German approach was corporatist and highly technical. German consumer groups consciously avoided political polarization and mass action. Their input was strictly top-down.
So less protest, more paperwork.
You could say that. They gained legitimacy by focusing on expertise and technical knowledge, for instance, by ensuring consumer representation on important committees, like the ones that set industrial standards.
So in France, consumers mobilized to fight for a new law. But in Germany, they mobilized to ensure the standard for the electrical plug was safe and fair. The goal was technical fairness, not political agitation.
Exactly. And this perfectly illustrates that persistent tension we identified at the start. Who is speaking for the consumer? Is it the mass membership base, the technical expert, or the state-sanctioned corporation?
And finally, returning to the U.S., even in the modern free market consumers' republic, moral agendas still find ways to restrict or corral consumption, proving that the struggle never really ends.
And the clearest, most effective political banner under which these moral battles are fought is the protection of children.
Because children are politically useful. They're legally deemed incapable of rational choice, making them a perfect object for political protection.
It provides the wedge. The effort in the 1970s, for example, to ban children's TV advertising argued that such commercial speech was inherently unfair to children, that it was an infringement on parental rights.
Did it work?
No, it was ultimately defeated by powerful business interests arguing for commercial speech rights. But the argument itself, it remains really potent today in battles over tobacco, gambling, and online content.
This has been a whirlwind tour.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen that consumption is just intrinsically linked to political struggle defining rights, national identity, and state stability. We traveled from revolutionary debates over 8 barrels of rum all the way to Cold War dictatorships compromising with state-run luxury shops.
The sheer depth of the sources confirms that the question isn't whether consumer politics exists. It always has. The question is, who is defining the consumer and what kind of citizenship is being prioritized in that definition?
So, think about the tension that was described by those early socialists. Is modern consumption truly satisfying your natural wants? Or does the relentless demand for goods, the pressure to buy, replace, and upgrade, still impose unnecessary toil globally? It raises a massive question for you to mull over. If you were asked to submit your modern grievance list, your cahier de doléances, what would you list today regarding the constant consumption we are expected to undertake?